Alex Answer here, May 26th, 2015, coming to you from Southern Colorado. I want to talk a little bit in this video about stored food, give you a few tips. My opinion is my opinion, based on my own experience and what works for me. What works for you may be different. And so I take that into account, but I want to give you some basic advice. I've built up my food storage before, my food supply, and I've had to let it go through moving years ago. And somewhere out there in a cabin in Estacada, I've got hundreds of pounds of grains, from mung beans to kamut berries to black beans to white rice, brown rice to amaranth. The bucket of quinoa I went through. And what I found out was when I bought all that stuff back in 2007, 2008, and started learning more about the nutritional content of these grains, quinoa is a superfood. And although it costs more than a lot of the other grains, there's actually a listing price at Azure Standard. There's a link down below. That's a great quality wholesale bulk food company based out of the Mount Hood area of Oregon. They actually distribute to co-ops and some grocery stores all throughout the western states. I came across a co-op here in town that had a notice that they do order from Azure Standard and another company. And so this quinoa goes at $94, goes for $94 for 25 pounds. But 25 pounds of quinoa, that's multiple months of food. 1 cup of quinoa yields, I think, at least 3 cups of cooked quinoa or more. But it's nutritious. It contains all 9 amino acids. And for Alex Ansary, for my own nutritional needs, knowing my own body, that is one of the most important survival foods that I can recommend anybody get. And it doesn't have gluten. That's a concern for a lot of people. Traditionally, people have stored wheat and rice. And I do see value also in wheat and rice, but in particular brown rice. Also other things like kamut berries. That's an Egyptian grain. It has more protein than wheat, and it's also gluten-free. And also, it's loaded with magnesium and minerals and other things that are good for you. And I would also recommend organic oatmeal. Oatmeal is obviously good for a lot of different reasons. And I saw in a recent video, a woman was advocating getting organic popcorn instead of the GMO corn. And with the use of a grain mill, and there's a number of different grain mills to choose from. There's the $400 one from the Country Living grain mill, I believe it is. Then there's also some cheaper ones that you can find for $20 to $50, but they may not last as long. And I forget the name of it. I'm sure some of you know, but the actual device, there are different sizes, basically, of grain mills for different grains themselves. And so there are some that are one size fits all. Check out your local antique stores. These are places where grain mills tend to end up. Every now and then I will see them at the thrift store. It really depends on the thrift store that you're going to. Some thrift stores have great stuff in small towns and big towns. It also is a supply and demand issue. So keep your eyes open for things that can assist you. If you are thinking about getting a food supply, I currently don't have a grain mill, but I'm going to be thinking about getting a grain mill this year. So in addition to quinoa, which I am putting at the top of my list, as well as oatmeal, as I mentioned, brown rice, wheat, as well as kamut berries. If you have a allergy to gluten, it's also recommended by some people to just avoid wheat completely, because it said that it's really not good for us, and what a lot of people are eating today is genetically modified, and there are health risks that come from eating things that were really designed for human consumption. So gluten-free flours are out there of a variety of sorts, and I personally am thinking about which route I want to go with the gluten-free flour. Which specific ones might be best for me, my diet. And one thing that I'm thinking about in particular, because this is about non-perishable staples, to incorporate into your diet now. Not necessarily like store it away and maybe you'll pull it out in 3 years if there's a disaster. I'm tailoring this discussion about things that you're going to be eating now, as many of us are already awakening to the need to live a healthier lifestyle, to stay away from fast food restaurants, to eat in more and be aware of what's in our food. There's a massive awakening arising. You just can't say no to Monsanto and keep doing the same thing you've always done, drinking Coca-Cola or going to McDonald's. And I've made my mistakes going to certain restaurants in certain places as well, knowing better. And so for a lot of us, before a major disaster, we should be adapting to a healthier lifestyle, which is why I'm recommending quinoa, which is a superfood and not a cheap one, at bulk at 25 pounds, to get something like that if you can afford it or if it's within reach, and the other staples that I mentioned, especially if you have a family, looking at oatmeal, looking at gluten-free flours, looking at organic popcorns, a healthier option than the GMO corn. On a larger scale, also, there are staples like beans, which I haven't mentioned, of a variety of sorts, from black beans, which are my favorite, to mung beans. Then there's also the realm of lentils, things of that nature. For those of you that love Indian food like I do, although I'm not a great Indian cook, although I can cook a few things, I love chicken vindaloo. But, you know, some of these spices at some of these Indian stores, I really recommend. It's not just curry. There are other things outside of curry or things with turmeric or cumin, which are usually the base ingredients in Indian curries. And so keep in mind that this is really about being able to prepare something that is going to please your palate. And it's progress, not perfection. And a lot of us in this day and age, a lot of men and women in this particular generation, and I would say this day and age, so not necessarily younger folk, but some older folk, a lot of people just don't know how to cook. And we have been living, some of us, an easier lifestyle than those that came before us, even in these downtimes. So I would recommend buying foods and incorporating them into your diet now, getting away from the toxic poisons at the mainstream grocery stores, and incorporating some of these things into your diet. In particular, when it comes to gluten-free pizza, you know, and I've been thinking about an off-the-grid oven for a number of years. So when I'm in an off-the-grid situation, that's one of the things that I'm going to construct, along with getting all the tools that I need, the grain mill, things of that nature, along with the necessary ingredients, the flour, gluten, and non-gluten. I think it's important to have backup. Plus, you can also share some food with others, and also stocking up on the other basic essentials. What I'm not going to get into too deeply in this video is some of the other things that one might add to their food supply, because some of that is for your own taste. But there are some basics, of course, that deal with having sugars or having stored butters, stored cheeses. Peanut butter is a great source of protein. And there's also things like honey, which in of itself is very medicinal, or maple sugar. There's also something that I prefer to put on my salads, that is Bragg's amino acids. So if you're growing a garden, which hopefully some of you are, if you're able to, if you have the space, I would recommend practicing. I would recommend getting in the routine of, if you're able, planting something every season, and not assuming that you have to have a green thumb, so to speak, in order to grow something. It's really about having fertile soil, or adding nutrients to that soil, giving it the water that it needs, not too much, not too little, and the sunlight, photosynthesis, will take care of the rest. The sun is an amazing thing on so many levels. People forget. It's not just about the solar cycles. It's about the fact that the sun can actually help us grow food for us to eat. And we may need to do that in a particular point in the future. So next to storing those basic staples, it's important to have seeds to grow something. And it's important that a good percentage of the seeds are staple foods or things of that nature that perhaps you can store or package for later use and consumption. So growing things like corn, if you're able to access organic corn, which I'm hearing more and more is really rare, that's awesome. But perhaps you may want to have some corn anyway, even if it's not organic, because in a survival situation, it's not about whether something's organic or not. It's whether there's actually food to eat or not. And again, placing extra emphasis on having extra food in order to trade or barter with. So there's things like beans, there's things like squash, there's things like pumpkin, there are things like zucchini. Now, I don't have a lot of experience growing these things, but I know that these are staples. Also tomatoes. Also being able to can things and having other tools like something that can freeze dry something. And for those of you in states or places where there's lots of fruits and vegetables, that's really valuable to be able to store apricots and cherries and grapes. So I didn't want to get super complex, but you know, when I saw this Facebook page recently, the co-op in the town that I'm near say that they are taking orders for bulk food, and that they're ordering from Azure Standard. You know, I had a flashback of how good it felt to feel prepared and have the basics around me. But I also remember the community aspect back in 2008, where there were, again, about a dozen of us, myself and a few viewers of Outside the Box TV, and we're all working together, having these conversations about meeting nutritional requirements, about having, you know, a well-grounded food supply. Some of you are watching that have families, that are thinking about going off-grid, that are thinking about the future. And even if you're not thinking about going off-grid, the fact of the matter is you've got to eat, and we know how sensitive the system is that is responsible for trucking the food into our cities and communities, a system where more and more Americans these days are on food stamps. And so America is not in a good situation economically when you have this by design dependency on the state. So these reasons and more, in particular your health, there's more and more people that are stepping back from McDonald's, more and more people that are stepping back from Taco Bell, more and more people that are stepping back from buying that meat at the grocery store. It's important that we talk about these things. And as more people go off meat, I still eat meat, but there's more and more people that are going off meat. It's important to know how to meet your basic nutritional requirements to get enough protein without actually eating animal fat or animal meat. And of course, that's where things like quinoa come into play. So when I saw them put that ad out there, I'm going to be going down there this week and ordering that 25-pound bag of quinoa for $94 plus the $20 surcharge. Because to me, that is worth it. Knowing my own diet, knowing how much my body enjoys eating quinoa, knowing and feeling how much more nutritious that particular seed is. It's actually a seed than many other things. That's why I've made quinoa my number one. From there, I will build and get brown rice. I will get perhaps some camu berries. I will get some oatmeal. Perhaps get some honey, some extra peanut butter, some other things, some more seeds down the line. But for now, I'm starting with that one basic staple and then working from there. Hopefully this video gave you some information. And if you are in one of the Western states, you can order from Azure Standard, and I think you can get the wholesale deal, but you have to order above $400 worth or $500 worth. I believe that you can save a lot of money for both yourself and your family if you do it yourself. If you get the Mylar bags, if you get the oxygen absorber tabs, and you get the buckets, and you get the gummy seal lids, and you do it yourself, and you start implementing it. As soon as this stuff arrives at your house, it's pizza night for you and your family and your kids. It's time to make the dough. It's time to watch it rise. It's time to actually build those real-life skill sets, i.e. cooking, that some of us possibly never learned from our parents to begin with, because perhaps they never learned it to begin with. More and more Americans and more people worldwide that have been living in this globalized system in recent years have forgotten the basics of life. Hopefully this video has given people some additional information and things to think about. We'll talk to you later.